good evening or good morning, depending on where you are. I see a lot of people joining us from across the globe today. Welcome to the Better World Symposium, and thank you for joining us for today's event. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the chat box. I'll bring them up later at the end of the presentation. In first half of the session today, Professor Adam will elaborate on how we could have a better chance at creating sustainable futures by taming the VUCA through resilient systems. It's my great privilege and honor to introduce our first speaker for this session, Professor Adam. Professor Adam has spent much of his career focusing on business and market transformation using human-centered design processes for companies like IBM and Infosys. He consults through Trope Collaborative and teaches at the Institute of Design at Illinois Institute of Technology. He has a BFA in Visual Communication from University of Illinois at Chicago, an MFA in Graphic Design from Rhode Island School of Design, and a Fulbright recipient to the National Institute of Design. Now, without further ado, I will turn it over to Professor Kalish. Over to you, Prof.
Welcome. Very much. I appreciate the introduction. For the 211 participants, good evening, afternoon, and morning, because obviously we live in a world, so I want to make sure I'm holistic in my understanding. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. Let's see if the technology works. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So, I've enjoyed listening to speakers so far as they've highlighted many issues that address purpose, values, change, people, systems, process, and technologies. And what's really been exciting today is what they're doing in their specific industries using design to propose better outcomes. Our session today will touch on these issues at a macro scale. I would like to say from the outset that I will not be addressing the current pandemic, not because it's not important, but because many of the trends and issues I will be discussing have been accelerated by the pandemic. I'm going to discuss 12 forces from my perspective that are driving new ways of living and working. Choice used to be a local phenomenon based on what was available. With the rise of the internet, choices have exploded because people can find many options for the same product or service all over the world. This has also affected how we view relationships because the barriers to exit relationships are now low to non-existent. We now reserve our right to change our stance, our outlook, or commitment to products and services and people at will. Due to convenience, automation, and the integration of digital in our physical world, we are increasingly moving to self-service. This lessens our interactions with other people, and now organizations are not even assigning people to interact with you. This shift is redefining the meaning of what a service is, and even what work is. Due to speed, work and life are merging, where protocols and behaviors are becoming streamlined. Everything is becoming abbreviated, from our language, our clothing, and our work relationships through an environment of familiarity. Purpose-driven work, flexible scheduling, high-trust environments, and work-life balance is driving a more informal and transformed culture. Long-established knowledge that existed in silos are now being recombined to create many different strains of hybrid knowledge, which is also creating intellectual turbulence, redefining what competence and craft is. Hybrid professionals now integrate multiple perspectives at work being done by multiple teams. This is also redefining what work is, and now is forcing the long overdue discussion of work-life balance. We have greater access to information, which is also creating greater social, political, and economic divisions that separate us, or inequalities that divide us. The writings of Marshall McLuhan, Herbert Simon, and Alvin Toffler predicted societal transformations based on information economies, but they didn't necessarily see the social economy that is using information to drive people interacting. Due to the proliferation of mobile technology, virtualized infrastructure, platforms, and software, individuals are able to use everything as a service without the burdens of ownership. This is now called the sharing economy. Everyone has access to software as a service to spin up any service in a matter of minutes, modify it with APIs, auto-test it, and then distribute it quickly, often within an hour or less. Each of us now can create our own digital ecology without knowing much code because everything has embedded code patterns. With the Internet of Things, common everyday objects are now instrumented with predictive AI, which collects the mundane daily facts, finding patterns, and delivers insights in return for course correction functions. Whole new classes of objects are on the rise which blur physical and digital worlds. Most people find these objects convenient because they adapt to you. However, if everything in your life is being recorded, what does that mean for your privacy? Artificial intelligence is not just for chatbots anymore. Learning systems are revolutionizing all aspects of our life, even if we do not think we have any interactions with AI. These systems are making our lives more convenient and are expediting the delivery of services, as well as doing things that we do not have to do anymore. But many are questioning AI in terms of privacy and employment loss. Virtual reality and digital twins are starting to revolutionize how we interact with our built environment by integrating data and information into physical objects as layers of data. This allows organizations to work on products without them being physically present and even course correct their performance from far away. We now want to test drive a product or a service before committing to them. Relationships with companies and services are becoming performance-based, offering us the ability to make and break relationships easily due to minimal switching costs. Instagram was created by 7 people and sold for $1 billion US. Jeff Bezos of Amazon stated, "If a team cannot be fed by 2 pizzas, then the team is too large." It is known that individual effort decreases as team size increases. Communications break down, and individuals feel the amount of support they get from others decrease. It is Moore's law of more productivity with less people. So how do these 2 factors work together? These 12 trends form concentric circles of influence, cause and effect that impact us as individuals, our neighbors, our state, our country, and the world. These trends are both disrupting and redefining individual and collective interactions. Instead of viewing them as discrete trends, each becomes an ingredient which informs and creates better worlds. So now I'm going to talk about the future always has a better tomorrow, because obviously the theme of this symposium is better worlds. The future is always perfect because it starts with a powerful vision and set of ideas. Yet due to unintended consequences, it can also be dystopian through new forms of vulnerability and risk. There is a long history of designers who wrote manifestos about better futures. A manifesto is a public declaration that espouses fundamental change and in many ways is meant to be a transformative way to incite the mind and emotions with specific provocations. So over the last century and into this century, there have been many well-known, these are Western, obviously, art and design manifestos who espoused a better future. Bruce Mau created the blockbuster exhibition Massive Change as a way to directly showcase many of the globe's most urgent problems using design as a framework to categorize responses on a grand scale. What resonated with the public was the audacity of the exhibition and that their fears and insecurities could be addressed through specific examples from a number of countries. Massive Change presented design as an optimistic activity. So now I'm going to discuss why change is hard. So this is sort of the hard part because we're working against the physics of the world. We all know that there have been many better future proposals that never happened. The more audacious the proposal, the harder it is to align power centers and people, operationalizing it and building it to match the original vision. John Chris Jones, the British industrial designer, created with a group of people in the 1960s a way to rethink design by integrating human-centered and system approaches. He wrote Design Methods in 1970, which was a direct wellspring for design thinking we have today. He viewed desirable futures as difficult to achieve because we are trapped in the present world of assumptions and biases coupled with the power of the status quo. The past is powerful because it provides us history, continuity, and familiarity. So we inherit the past, and in many ways we're trapped by it. In our forever present, we are trying to question, modify, and reshape possible futures, linking our current knowledge with our unbounded imaginations. Yet we tend to overestimate the short-term impact of our proposals and underestimate the long-term consequences of our actions. This is perfectly expressed in McKinsey's hype cycle. So our ideas get people excited by capturing people's imaginations on possible benefits and impacts. Then many of these fail to come about, and we become frustrated with the original proposal. Then through trial and error, some of the proposal does begin to happen and show some benefits. Then we move into a slightly better present of productive benefits. So this happens over and over again, and this has been proven over and over again. Changing the current state means to question everyone's values, assumptions, and behaviors, and convince them to change. Organizations and bureaucracies' main purpose is to maintain the status quo, slow things down, de-risk, and maintain existing accountabilities. They create many barriers that will fight any better future proposal. So many of the things that you see here are things that have been talked about today and things that we're going to have to deal with as designers when we deal with organizations. So what is power exactly? Hard power involves coercive force using military and economic means to influence behavior of the interests of others to attain a specific agenda. Soft power involves non-coercive means to shape the preferences of others through the appeal and attraction of credibility. Design is a soft power that can affect large economic issues over time. Surya will elaborate further on the use of the hive mind to channel soft power. Napoleon, the master of hard power, recognized that in the long term, the mind and soft power will always win over hard power. Now I want to try to focus and talk about systems design, and that was mentioned several times today, which I was happy to hear about. So I want to level set, what is a system? Natural and man-made systems are interrelated entities that achieve a goal through a series of aggregated functions. Any system will inform and rely on a series of subsystems, each with their own function that consume inputs and create outputs that benefit the overall system. A system uses processes, procedures, and protocols to shape inputs and outputs that are the operating instructions to assure the goal of any system. Founded, influenced, defined, and expressed to achieve its purpose is the forever present. Changing one part of a system may affect the other parts of the subsystem or the entire system itself. Its structure may adapt and particular functions will change in order to keep the system running, but many existing systems are optimized and are not resilient. Viewing people, situations, environments, and capabilities and messages can create more informed and resilient futures. Systems design directly addresses what gets in the way of delivering value to people by creating and mediating and integrating and increasing and reducing to operationalize less rigid and more adaptive systems. And now I want to really focus the bulk of the discussion on creating resilient systems, because resiliency is really where things are moving. Due to VUCA, or volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and the 12 trends I shared at the beginning, the status quo is under stress. We're trying to address larger macroeconomic problems by design, But wicked problems are challenging because of incomplete, contradictory, changing requirements, complex interdependencies, and even power imbalances. Surya will elaborate further on wicked problems and their opportunities for innovation. Tim Cook commented that the world is a chaos factory and we unknowingly contribute to it. Instead of reacting, thinking things through is key to becoming a positive force in the world. So what do we have to do to begin? We have to get focused. Due to everything I shared so far, we need to shift from creating optimal outcomes because they cannot take the stresses and strains of current VUCA realities. Better future proposals need to address highly ambiguous and ever-changing situations by using our envisioning skills to embrace bounded diversity to channel VUCA through resiliency. Better Futures is about gaining insight, reframing our understanding, creating informed choices, and then converge understanding and commitment on specific scenarios that use systems design to change the world. And so you can see here, design thinking creates choices, and then we have to make choices. And this obviously is done through having a clear goal, questioning the goal, observing the as-is state, reflecting on what we've seen, proposing a to-be state, prototyping MVPs, and then obviously getting to the desired transformation. And then these essentially are subsystems that need to be addressed in order to create an interdependency and resiliency which can adapt to VUCA forces, behavior, and technologies. We need to embrace that we have an integrated lack of control with our desire to control the future. In order to address VUCA, we need to be very clear on specific core issues, their adjacent issues, and also be clear on what we will not address. We also need to recognize and be prepared that our responses may have unintended consequences by continually learning and course correcting based on what actually happens, not on what we hope will happen. An example of unintended consequences is the current state of social media, which was created to bring people together to share and deepen human relationships. Designers were part of its creation and used human-centered practices to create social experiences. Yet due to a confluence of factors and subsystems, these platforms have turned into a dystopian model which has eroded trust and even what shared reality is. Resilience is about adapting to changing conditions to maintain a system's vitality. These 8 factors that you see here will help us create outcomes that can take the stresses and strains and build in continuous improvement to create dynamic and resilient better futures. The 8 factors can help reduce, channel, and redefine many aspects of VUCA using the analogy of judo, which uses an opponent's force against them in order to create more robust systems. So here are some key things that we can do to reduce volatility, channel uncertainty, redefine complexity, and address ambiguity. A good model that does address a more resilient system is the Living Principles by AIGA here in the United States. Created by Gabby Brink, Nathaniel Destinow, and Phil Hamlet, they drew from many manifestos, principles, visions, frameworks, and tools from the last 50 years. This framework can address complex problems using rigorous multidisciplinary collaborations that explore any problem space and identify core, adjacent, and external issues which can impact desired outcomes and reduce unintended consequences. In IDEO, there was discussion early on about the circular economy. IDEO created a great website with resources that actually create a circular model for progress. In order for us to create better futures, we need to engage with stakeholders as we've seen today in authentic and trusting ways that take into account individual beliefs and behaviors and socialize new concepts as a community. This is a tall order, but is the only way for us to make better futures a shared and beneficial reality. And I want to thank everybody for making time for me. I'm very honored to be here. And I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker. Thank you.
This was an amazing and very insightful talk, Professor Kalish. Thank you so much for such insightful session. I can feel the, I can feel the excitement in the audience as well, right? So now, without any wait, I will turn over to the much-awaited talk of the day. It's my honor to introduce our second speaker of the session, Professor Surya Vanka, who actually needs no introduction. Professor Vanka is an award-winning designer, educator, and author who leads the world-renowned Authentic Design Studio. He has been at the forefront of physical and digital experiences, so what you were mentioning, Professor Adam, for more than 25 years. He served as the director of user experience at Microsoft and is tenured faculty of design at University of Illinois and a fellow of the prestigious Center of Advanced Studies. Professor Vanka has authored books on design and has countless publications and given talks across the globe. When you look at his credentials and his CV, you certainly feel that you haven't done much in your life. Without any delay, I'll hand it over to Professor Vanka to take us through his groundbreaking work on Design Swarm, which I totally love. It's an approach that is more agile, participatory, inclusive, and democratic. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you, Amit. That is, how do I live up to that intro now, right? So let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. Are we good? You see my screen?
Yes.
We good? Awesome, great. First of all, thank you so much for having me. This is something I've really been looking forward to. So good internet time to everybody. We are in all different time zones. This is our new reality. Just want to say that was just a brilliant talk from Adam. Thank you, Adam. That is it. You know, think about doing a masterclass in 20 minutes that is a survey of so many frameworks in that much time. Boy, that was amazing. And I caught the tail end of Sonam's talk, and I love this notion of finding a little laboratories where we incubate and create the new. I'm so sorry to have missed Neelam's talk. I'm such a fan of her work. But hey, it was 4 a.m. in the morning for me. So Adam called out some really important principles. He also, and thanks for a shout out about the connection to the hive mind, right? And which I will be talking about. But the important things that I heard from Adam was his frameworks around, the importance of scalability, adaptability, resilience, and the new ways that design systems are forming. My own talk is going to be a much more personal talk. And during this talk, what I will go through is, this is the roadmap of my talk. I'm going to talk about a little bit about problems of scale. Really overlaps a lot with what Adam was talking about. And what I see as the new system emerging, really the new human creative system that's emerging. And that is what I like to frame as swarm creativity and my own experiments in that area. I'm also going to briefly touch on COVID as a lab, as a laboratory for the next phase of innovation, and use the framework of the shift from design 1.0 to 4.0 as a underlying infrastructure framework here. So before I begin, just so you know where I'm coming from, these are my beliefs. I have a few beliefs. I believe all people are intrinsically creative. I believe that it's not just a minority of people that are a creative class, but every human being is creative. Now, it does turn out that a minority of us go to design schools. We get a chance to be able to unleash that creativity. But I believe that when people can channel their creative power, everybody can do incredible things. They can do incredible things for themselves, their families, their villages, their towns, their countries, perhaps even for the world. And I think that key that unleashes that raw human creativity is this magical, amazing thing that we become expert at. Us who are having this conversation, us who go to design school, and that is the design thinking process. That ultimately elastic, malleable process that can be applied towards any different kind of challenge. What it does is unlock raw human creativity and direct it towards outcomes. So my mission is to unleash the design thinker in every person and organization so that they actually bring value, create value. So that's the mission that I chase. That's the mission of Authentic. And that underlies what I'm going to speak about. So I mentioned Design 4.0. I believe we're on the cusp of moving to, or have moved to, or starting to move towards the fourth phase of design, Design 4.0, where design begins to have impact on a very different scale than it's had in the past towards social and planetary transformation. Now, this has not always been the case. We've gone through a journey where design scope has been in Design 1.0, primarily towards crafting communications and products, right? This is more about aesthetics, beauty, creating these gorgeous, beautiful things in the world, right? And then we went through going to Design 2.0, where this expanded, didn't shift, but expanded to design's preoccupation being not only products and services, but all products and communication, but also experiences and services. And that expanded further. And this is really where we are located today, which is Design 3.0 as a tool of organizational transformation and moving business forward, of large systems of people, products, practices, tied to large scale. And I myself have spent a lot of time. I spent 16 years of my life working at Microsoft and one technology company where I built a bunch of different products, and I've worked my way through, using my learning, going through Design 1.0 and 2.0. And then I got a role during my second half of my career at Microsoft to actually be doing Design 3.0, which is transforming the company, really shifting the culture of the company, helping the company learn how to use design as a competitive advantage. Incredible opportunity, a lifetime opportunity. And, it's also a time where Satya Nadella had joined the company, which added a whole bunch of energy to that. He didn't join the company, he became CEO, sorry. And it added a whole bunch of energy to creating design, the force of design, creating a designerly company. This was a very important learning for me in particular. There was a epiphany I had, which was being part of the small team that Satya pulled together and said, hey, I want to get Microsoft to be the largest startup in the world. And so he said, I want to get everybody hacking. And so what I want you to do is create a hackathon where 120,000 employees could all be hacking as a part of their work, but this is just a 2-day event. And so we created this, and eventually about 15,000 employees participated in this in 230 cities and 80 countries. And for 38 hours, there were 3,000 projects that were really hack projects. For me, helping drive and participate, that really shifted the way I thought about design. In particular, there was a project. This project was called the Eye Gaze Project. And the how might we of this project was, how might we provide mobility, dignity, and independence to somebody who has ALS, that cruel disease that takes away all physical ability, but leaves your mind absolutely intact. And in 38 hours, this team, I watched as they did it. I wasn't part of the team, but I was observing what they did. In 38 hours, they built a functioning product that worked and which now has moved forward. I was thinking, how did that happen? 38 hours, I've been in so many projects where I worked for 2 years and don't get those results. And when I reflected on that and reflected on what took place in the most powerful projects that I'd been witnessing, not only in the hackathon, but elsewhere, was this phenomena of the creativity of swarms. I noticed this pattern that successful teams have when they solve complex problems. These teams don't tend to function as command and control organizations, but they have the nimbleness of an ant farm, the grace of a shoal of fish as they work their way through really challenging problems. And it struck me, really connecting also to what Adam talked about. In this time when we're beset by problems of volatility, uncertainty, change, and ambiguity, this particular model has some legs. And after spending a lot of time at Microsoft, I left, And I was really concerned, like all of us on this call are, about this particular moment when we are, this VUCA moment for our planet, where we have the tsunami and the climate crisis moving towards us. We stand at a very particular moment in time. We find ourselves at a crossroads. We find ourselves at a fork in the road. There are two futures available to us still today. And that window's closing, but as of today, we still have the possibility of both a utopian future and a dystopian future where we are overtaken by the climate crisis, and a utopian future that we pull it together. We harness all this technology, harness all the creativity, and harness all our abilities to move towards a more utopian future. And not to be super grim, but we live in a troubling time. There's almost nothing left pristine anymore. Plastic has found its way into all of our fellow creatures. We are losing over 100 species per day. Species that have been around for 50 million years go extinct every day. And now it turns out like the problems coming back and attacking us humans. And this is in the backdrop of where we are 7.5 billion today, human beings, and we're going quickly towards 9 billion, and we are starting to see some limits of scale, and we're starting to see limits of resources. We've ended a century of wars over oil, starting a century of wars over water. Cities are going out of control. And, some of our models of what we thought was happiness, consumption, are truly trying to break down. So we live at this particular moment in history where we have thousands of wicked problems. Thank you, Adam, for introducing that frame of wicked problems. So we do live in that time. And when I think about what I was doing at Microsoft at a very much smaller scale, it was really trying to solve in a business context wicked problems, and towards taking on those wicked problems during that hackathon, during all those years that was there. It was really using one process, one simple, repeatable process that all of us are expert at, that we call the design thinking process, right? It is something that is very accessible to us. So can we take this process and turn this around and point it, all this creativity that we have in the world, and turn it towards this VUCA moment we find ourselves at? So can we take this sawtooth model, this stage-by-stage repeatable process, and take human creativity? And of course, there's a hypothesis that there is a lot of human creativity in the world. And so I spent a few years studying, is that hypothesis truly true? And yes, it is. If you look around, you find raw creativity is just waiting to emerge. Here are some schoolgirls in Nigeria who, with no training as scientists or designers, came up with this way to turn pee into power, a urine power generator. Here's this young man who recognized, this is Shubham Banerjee, who recognized that Braille printers are extremely expensive. So he created a company that made this out of Lego. And here is Richard Turere, a Maasai boy, when he's 8 years old, sent out by his parents to go keep cattle safe from the lions, and instead of using the old methods of doing that, of poisoning the lions, rigged together this set of lights using an old car battery and things like that. And he doesn't speak English, right? And he just came up with this idea. And so there is this huge reservoir of human creativity. So how do we unleash this huge reservoir of 7.5 billion people creativity in service of this moment where? So this was the problem that I was chasing. Saying, but how do you do that? I went to school for so many years to learn this process, to internalize it. And for me, a breakthrough came when I was traveling in Australia, in the red heart of Australia. This is a big rock, the sacred rock of Uluru in the middle of the desert, which has got the longest civilization anywhere, over 25,000 years old. But it's a doesn't have a spoken language, it doesn't have a written language, but it does have a symbolic language. And so if you go close to the rock Uluru, you find all over, there's a lot of wisdom, which is all in these pictures, is a universal language. And inspired by that, I thought, what if I take the design thinking process, and what if we turn that into these process maps using really our first language, the visual, so that everybody has access to it, right? So we can take this huge amounts of super sophisticated knowledge and just make it very simple, almost game-like, that people can play the game of design. And so here was a hypothesis, would that work? So I got an opportunity to test that. In the city that I live in, Seattle, there is a challenge with homelessness among women. And the city's tried many things and it's always failed. And so brought together a group of folks, women who had suffered homelessness in the past or were currently homeless. And in a day, they worked together using this process map, and they actually came up with very, very solid solutions that hadn't been seen before. Since then, I've had the opportunity to take this process map and go, really in a whole bunch of places and work with a whole bunch of passionate people, some designers, some not, to take on challenges such as cleaning the water, preventing, this is in Kenya, these are waterborne diseases. This is rainwater harvesting in Brazil. And so I learned a lot, and I was astonished by just the creative power that can be unleashed once we make these processes visible. And so it is very, very simple, process, familiar tools, post-it notes, people working together. But an important thing, multiple groups working together on a project at the same time. But I did notice something, which was all these projects, the problem shape was different. Here's the shape of some problems. Early, fuzzy front-end problems. Here are some of the problems that require more iteration. And then some problems just look like this. They're just super complex. And so a single process map like this doesn't really fit all problems. So I took that and turned it into a system of process maps, kind of a Lego kit. So depending on the shape of the problem, whether it's a fuzzy front-end problem, a problem that requires more iteration, a problem that needs to be done in a shorter amount of time, or a problem that needs to be done in a very, very short amount of time, you can create a different kind of a problem-solving surface. So that's an example of a problem-solving surface, which is about a day long. And here we see an example. This is folks who are actually opioid addicts and front room emergency physicians taking the problem that a person dies every 11 minutes from the opioid crisis and solving the problem and coming up with really fantastic solutions to that. So over doing hundreds of these workshops around the world, there was a lot of learning, and this was also bringing people together in space, creating energy, moving people through this journey of exploring problem space and moving solution space, and coming up with these amazing results where people's creativity could be unleashed. And then things changed. Suddenly, the future was not it was. We could no longer gather together in rooms. We could no longer look across a table. We could no longer start being in person, doing all these things. The future shifted in a matter of weeks to where we are right now, where we can be no longer in the same room together. But something astonishing also is happening. Faced with this global event, we've seen another unexpected thing happen, which is this burst of creativity. Masks have become an important thing because we're fighting this virus thing. And if we look at the world just through the sliver of masks, we see this huge amount of creativity. People who knew nothing about making masks have engaged in this project. People are converting scuba gear into masks and ventilators, right? People have taken their industries overnight and started to create things like do-it-yourself ventilators. This is SpaceX, or rather Virgin Galactic, that transformed their line to create these overnight, move into doing this. This is Dyson, from making vacuums, making ventilators, right? People figuring out clever ways to split a single ventilator into two. People starting to rethink airport spaces as hospitals. So amazing amount of bottom-up creativity that we're seeing, right? We've seen this in India, where the whole idea of taking railway carriages and thinking of them as ICU rooms, right? The notion of creating these pop-up booths. So, and also some reversals, people who would previously be recipients of what others create have now become creators. And so there is a celebration of the human creative spirit that we see everywhere. And we see it at multiple levels. What is important at this moment when we are facing our first shared crisis as a species is also at this time, we also happen to be connected as a species. For the first time, we're all connected because of the rise of digital communication networks that connect us all. And this created an opportunity now to think about swarms as really something that's a digital experience. And so rather than processes done in physical rooms, it became, it transformed something that people at a distance can work together. Swarms can swarm together at a distance, right? Some of the things that start to emerge now is we start to be able to find ways to align objectives. Some of the things that happened previously where people's talents cancel each other out, now we can start to share these perspectives and raise each other. We start to see other kind of benefits which are unexpected. You know, when we are in Zoom rooms, when I'm a facilitator in a physical space, I can make eye contact only one person that I'm looking at. Now I can make eye contact with everybody, right? I am close to everybody in a room. We start to see other kinds of benefits where, you know, when we're working in a physical space, our bodies are opaque. They hide our problem-solving surfaces. But on a digital whiteboard, our bodies are invisible. It doesn't matter if you're a large man or a small woman. You're not trying to jostle for space to get to the board. We can work together, truly work together. But the most important thing that I find is now, as things move on these shared problem-solving surfaces, we start to be able to get what I call digital exhaust, a history of where we are. And we also start to be able to embed these surfaces with a lot of knowledge and wisdom. And this is a process for inclusive design, and we can negotiate our social values together. And so I've seen this where it's been possible to have, 15 people working together. Here are students, high school students doing ethical analysis and while solving a problem, to bringing together large global communities. This was over 100 participants, worked from 37 countries, working together to solve big problems very quickly. And so what has happened is, as it's been interesting to see the adoption by business and education and nonprofit, and there's something new emerging here, which is sort of the new boundarylessness. Boundarylessness is an important thing, where now, when we are all being able to work together on these problem-solving surfaces, something new starts to emerge, where we've got thousands of wicked problems, but we've got billions of creative minds. So the key message here is, there are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when entire decades happen, and we are living those weeks right now. And what we are also seeing is this momentum that we had from design 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0. Now we have the opportunity to move into design 4.0 and to what I'd like to think of is as a design-powered planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Vanka. What a delight it was to hear you. Right, I'm sure the audience enjoyed the presentation as much as I did. I'm constantly receiving messages from my students to know that when can we do, your framework and test that hands-on. So when can we do the hands-on workshop with you?
Yeah.
My students have been sending me messages. So we'll touch base on that. So we have some questions. I think, Adam, you answered one of the questions in the chat itself, but it'll be nice if we can repeat that question and answer to the entire crowd. So I'll repeat that question for you. So the question was, one second. Yeah. So someone asked, Professor Kailash, what would your advice be to students with access to less resources and infrastructure, especially in the wake of COVID-19, to be able to empathize with the users to create resilient systems? I believe as students, we often feel like we are under-equipped to be able to address the complexities of the wicked problem and or channel VUCA at such a rudimentary level. So your advice, I think that question should go to both of you. We will like to hear from both of you on this subject. Professor Adam, you can go first.
Well, I gave somewhat of an answer, but I'll essentially, when I was a young design student, I actually was young once. Charles Eames, the famous designer who helped start NID, he was asked, is design about possibility? Because that's what everybody thinks design is about. It's about possibility. He said, no, design is not about possibility. Design is the recognition of constraint. So in today's world where we feel constrained, overly constrained in terms of our ability to do many things that we took for granted, we sort of disempower ourselves and give away our sense of agency by saying, okay, well, we can't do anything because I can't just go out and do whatever I did before the pandemic. Where I think we need to use, and Surya talked about this, we need to use our creativity and direct it and use our curiosity as designers to actually observe and question and find workarounds. In Hindi, there's the word jugaad, which is a hack. So essentially, we have to hack our way through the virus. And Surya showed example after example of hacks. There are all sorts of hacks to expedite change. And so I think that is the power of being a design student. Your mind is your greatest instrument to actually affect change, because everything is in your brain. You just have to manifest it and be able to interact with others in order to get to a better outcome.
Nice, thank you so much. I think it's all about manifesting the idea in the brain and then get going with it. Your take on this, Professor Surya?
Well, I think, Adam said it really well. But I think there's some things we have to remember, which is, related to what he's saying, which is design's forte is it's a process discipline. It's not a domain discipline, right? Mm-hmm. This is what brings us extraordinary power of this particular thing we're engaged in, right? It's a process discipline, and it brings with it also certain mindsets. It's a future-oriented discipline. When you start designing, it's a ridiculous, audacious thing to do. To say something didn't exist, but you have unending conviction in the face of no proof that something will exist. So optimism, while we're being taught the process, while we're being taught skills, the thing we've been taught, the thing we learn is optimism. Not many disciplines look forward. Many disciplines look backwards. They extrapolate from the past. Design's different, it's abductive. We think of the world as it might be, right? Right? And in a VUCA world, this is such power to have, such power to offer.
I think it's likely said that, yeah, please.
But to build on it, because Surya, he has a wonderful ability just to get it down to the essence, is we have to use our applied imagination, because design is an applied discipline that uses process, as he said. But we also have to be very clear-eyed, because while design is optimistic and it's about the future using abduction, which is great, we also have to have the discipline to facilitate the needed discussions between all the different stakeholders who have incomplete views of the problem, who are pushing and pulling, who have different power centers, who essentially try to derail because they're the status quo. And how do we overcome the status quo? It's through socializing concepts that make people fearful and instead play on their curiosity rather than their fear, so they open up their closed-mindedness to possible futures that they just sort of would write off right away. So we've done that professionally, and I think that's the power of design. We have to become better facilitators because we really don't teach facilitation in design schools. We have to become better facilitators in order to deal with the complexities in the VUCA and to leverage a lot of what Surya talked about, because he had wonderful examples using his hive mind framework, which I think is fantastic. But we can't workshop our way out of the future. We do lots of workshops, but workshops are not an end in themselves. They're a gateway to help us do the hard work in terms of the physics of building. That's what workshops are for.
Thank you so much. My thesis supervisor used to tell me a great designer probably should be a better facilitator than a designer first, right? So I think you echo his words and I totally agree to it. Some part of your presentation, Professor Adam, mentioned about soft power and hard power, right? So I would want you to elaborate a little bit more on that in today's world, for a designer's context, today's designer's context, and especially people who are coming to the industry, new designers, right? What is the hard power and soft power that they should have to get into the industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that designers have pretty much been relegated to what I call the microeconomic scale, which is it's the design of objects at the hyper-local level, the executables, the deliverables, you know? And yeah, those are important. Geeta talked about that in her talk, you know? Design has to become more assertive. And I think Surya talked about it in a way. We have to become more assertive and audacious in our thinking and actually make proposals and be at the table to make proposals. And that's very much a hard power play in a way. We have to become better at playing hard power, but in the end, design is a soft power tool. It is, because it's a bottom up way of looking at it. We have to empower the people who are living with the problem to be co-create with us in order to create a better future. But those people don't have power, right? It's the bureaucracies and the governments that have the power. So how do you bridge the gap between the traditional hard power centers, governments, military, business, and all that, with soft power, which is of the people? And I think designers have to feel comfortable wielding a little bit more hard power, which is assertiveness, and using social, political, and economic levers to actually get the macro and micro together. And we're not good at that. We're just not good at that. I think we're getting better at it because I'm seeing design as becoming a bigger macroeconomic activity. But I still think we have an incomplete toolbox to do that. Surya, why? Because I think you probably have lots of ideas around this.
Well, I think, no, absolutely, to build on it, I think that for me, two constructs become really important here: leadership and learning, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Because as design, we were tied to the business of making, right? Now, remember, even though we're saying unleash everybody's design thinking power through giving them experiences, there's still a very small number of people. If you want to get everybody design literate, there's going to be a few people design masterful, but only a tiny number of people who invest deeply into learning design over years and years and years, who are going to be design fluent. Who are these people today? In the past, these people were makers. Now they're orchestrators of the large creative capital. But if you're going to have to orchestrate large creative capital, you often don't have authority. You only have influence, right? And so orchestration, facilitation, all of these things where you get the symphony going, right? Your conductor doesn't have hard power. The conductor has soft power, right? But you orchestrate and bring differences together. And so this is a leadership activity. Design school, when I went to design school, taught me leadership, right? But you cannot be a designer of the future without knowing leadership, how you influence, how you go back channel, how you drive change, how you create organizational change, all of those. Those become very critical in Design 4.0. So that's one part. Learning, why is learning? Today, after 25, 30 years of being a designer, I'm learning more today than I'm learning in the past. I'm investing more into learning today. Why? Because the contract shifted. Our old contract was you learn first, and then for the rest of your career, you use that learning you gained early. It shifted. Now we are in a continuous learning model. Today, my mentors are 20-year-old people, right? We're seeing reversal. So that's why leadership and learning, lifelong learning, become absolutely critical if you're going to have influence.
Right. Amen. Yeah. And also, Surya, to be a T-shaped designer. That's something that Geeta talked about early on. So instead of diving into industrial design and your whole world is just industrial design or graphic design or whatever, yes, you need to start in a skill vertical, but you have to branch out into other related areas of design or other fields that are adjacent to the design. So you begin to understand the larger social, political, economic context of practicing design.
That's right.
is
And
critical.
T-shaped design. I mean, I'm so glad you put that. That brings up two more words, and I love these alliterative words. That is courage and confidence, right?
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
when I went to design school, I was covered in sawdust and breathing marker fumes, right? Today, I'm covered in pixels and breathing data fumes, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The core of it is the same, but the
Yeah.
learning doesn't stop. The medium shifted, the material shifted. That is what T-shaped is, where the vertical
Yeah.
part of the T is still the same old design thinking process,
Yeah.
but the horizontal of the T. Yesterday, it was foam and paint and plastic and metal and all of that. Today, it's become algorithms and pixels and data. Tomorrow, we have no idea what it'll be. That part of the T is going to keep you. But to be able to go there, you have to have confidence of that, and you have to have courage to do this.
Absolutely.
Right? And so these are the T-shaped person of the future is going to, not he is going to needs it today, because the future is already here, right? It's not coming. It is here.
But it's not evenly distributed. That's what.
It's not evenly distributed. And in fact, one of the places where we're seeing the uneven distribution is in this conversation right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Thank you so much for answering these questions. I have few more in the Q&A. I'll put one forward. So Karthik asks, is creativity a possibility and identifying the most relevant solution? If yes, then how do you know where to stop if you are not satisfied, and how to attain the relevant possibility fast? So essentially what probably, if I understand properly what he means is that, where do you stop in the creative process? And, how do you attain what you want to attain through the creativity process in a faster way?
Yeah. I'm going to turn that over to Surya first, because he talked a lot about that.
Yeah. So first of all, this is the inertia of the past that, in a sense, this is something we struggle. This is a question. When, particularly in terms of what we built, when we built it out of atoms, that was an important question, because at some stage in the design process, if you had to inject plastic into a mold, a stopping rule was very important, that when you have reached a certain doneness, that the problem was solved at that point, and you could now stop at that point, push plastic into a mold, bend a piece of atoms that were sheet metal, or stamp something, do whatever, right? The most of the world that we live in today, although we still live in atoms and bits, most of the world, given that you no longer put finished things out in the world, you put proposals and experiments in the world, right? The stopping rule question shifts, right? And that state of when something is done. Now we know, particularly when we live in the world of services and all our digital services, the first thing that happens when you put something out in the world, it starts the process of breaking. So it is not, mean time to failure is no longer the important construct, which is what you care when you build a toaster. How long will my toaster last is a mean time for failure for your toaster, 5 years, 3 years, 1 year. Instead, we shift to mean time for recovery, because we know everything starts breaking the moment it's out of your hands. So we have to really think about stopping rules in a different way as starting rules, right? Yes. And learning is the important piece, right? In a world of continuous high velocity experimentations, everything we do is an experiment, and every time we gather learning, this is, of course, we got the inertia of a century of thinking a certain way. So we are in the midst of changing. I've talked too much. Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, but I'd like to build on that just for a second, because to me, design has always been associated with creativity, okay? Now, I came from the sciences originally before I went into design. And Richard Feynman, one of my heroes, he always used to say, why do artists and designers, why do they think they have the lockhold on creativity? I'm creative as a physicist. I mean, nobody owns, like Surya said, everybody has creativity and the ability to be creative. Design does not own it. But I think what design has neglected to do is really embrace systems thinking. I think it's starting to happen, and it's starting, I'm saying it because it's accelerating. Many programs are starting to talk about it, but designers need to embrace the whole notion of what systems theory is, systems thinking is, and then how subsystems and systems work together, not as some sort of mechanical process, but actually as a living, resilient dialogue between people and environment and communications and many of the things that we talked about here, how they interact with each other to create a holistic experience in the end. And as Surya said, we are not designing for perfection. We're designing for resiliency, which means that continuous improvement is built into our thinking in the system. When we deploy a system, some things happen the way we think it's going to happen. Many things happen that don't, that are against what we thought of. And so we have to sit there and then constantly iterate and course correct over time in order for that thing to actually see its full potential, just like the McKinsey hype curve. We have to reach a plateau of productivity, but we are going to have a trough of disillusionment. That means the designers are going to be somewhat disillusioned, and many of the stakeholders are going to be disillusioned because they have, we're disrupting the status quo, and we're getting excited about a future that is in the process of happening, but will never fully happen because we're in a constant beta. You know, we're essentially in constant beta. We're not creating finished things. Things are evolving over time.
Yep.
Thank you so much. It's such an exciting discussion. All my co-panelists, colleagues are messaging me to continue this and ask you a couple of more questions. So I'll ask you couple of more questions, one from the chat, and probably then I'll hand it over to one of my colleagues to kind of ask you one question that he desperately has in mind. So one attendee asks you, designers have knowledge of modern production consumption systems. How can we work with already existing knowledges that were wiped out by the Industrial Revolution? Don't we first have to dismantle the discipline of design?
Oh boy, that's a big one. Sorry,
Yeah,
I'd like to
big
start
one, yeah.
and I'm going to go back into the time machine. Okay, so when industrialization in England happened, okay, and in the first industry where industrialization happened was in the textile industry. That was the first industry that totally got industrialized. And what happened was it became a sort of a Dickens, sort of environment, of just horrible working conditions, unsafe. It was all too new. And there were a series of British architects and designers, and they questioned, where are we going as a society when we're delinking hyper-local making with industrial production? That was their main question. And should we destroy all the machines and go back to the old model, or is there something in the middle? And they created the arts and crafts movement in the 1880s. So from the 1880s to like the 1910s, around then, you had William Morris and Christopher Dressler and all of these designers who were having a dialogue about values and people and systems. And to me, I think the arts and crafts movement, in a way, is being reborn in today's day and age. I think we're trying to find, how can we improve all aspects of life that are actually human-centered? And that's exactly what they were trying to do in the arts and crafts movement, but they didn't have the term art, they didn't have the term human-centered back then. They were just trying to understand, how do we not hurt humans, and how do we create products that have integrity and craft and bring joy to people? That's really what they were struggling with then. I think that's what we need to do now. And that doesn't mean that we have to go and look at new innovations. We can innovate within existing processes and knowledge frameworks. We do it all day. So I think we have to fuse existing thinking and then use creativity, which unlocks new ways of looking at things to create new value, in order for us to create hybrid knowledge, which is something I talked about earlier, that we're all hybrids now. We live in a hybrid world. And I think that's great. But then the problem with that is craftsmanship starts to degrade, because what is craftsmanship? We don't have a full agreement on what craftsmanship is if everything is hybrid. And I think that's going to be our big challenge, which is how do we evaluate the craftsmanship of an idea? How do we evaluate the craftsmanship of an outcome if we're all hybrids? We need to have some skilled vertical people, like Surya was talking about, people with sawdust or pixel dust or data dust, who are actually dealing with the physics of how things get done. You know, there has to be some agreement on what the craft is.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer.
I may add something to that, just building on that. You know, I think this is such a key and important question, right? How do we not lose all that wisdom, right? I talked about, you know, those hundreds of species going extinct every day. We also have hundreds of languages that go extinct every month, right? Each of those languages contains bodies of wisdom and knowledge and so on. So there is, at this particular moment in history, there is this process of loss, right? Now, related to this also, the question really speaks to how do we, you know, this has become a conversation, an important conversation. How do we decolonize design, right?
Yeah.
And it's an important question. And it's important to notice that this particular thing called design was born with the birth of mass production and certain kind of hierarchical societies. And so the idea that you created a product in multiples, and there's a capitalist system where a few got served by this production of multiples, right? So this underlies, so when we talk of decolonizing design, we have to be aware of that underlying structure, because where are we going? We are moving towards a world where now there's really no reason to make multiples. In the world of 3D printing and data, every object and every message can be a single unique one. And also we have an adjacent concept there, which is the notion that instead of having one amazing person wearing a black turtleneck who is going to be the creator, now we're saying even the creation can be pushed to a lot of people. So we've got old habits, a century long, about how the understructure of design is. So this is challenging, hard. I think it's also in the midst of change. So there's also something else I call it is kindness as we go through this. We've got to be kind to ourselves, kind to others, kind to just the way of thinking, and not overly reactionary as well. But we have to work our way through this change.
Yeah. And to pick up just one thing I want to say, I really loved Neelam Chibber's presentation, because she said, you know, India had a long history of hyper-local microeconomic production, you know, creativity and production, and it got totally wiped out and stressed out when industrialization happened and economic policy took over, which was all about macroeconomic policy, and it got lost in the shuffle. And I think what Neelam is doing is trying to find a middle ground. She's saying, oh, let's just throw away capitalism, let's throw away decolonization, let's throw away all that. You can't do that. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. But what she's doing is, just like judo, you know, judo uses the opponent's force against them. She's using the judo method to actually deal with IKEA and global supply chains, and as well as the realities of people who are trying to eke out a living at the microeconomic level in India. And in the United States, here, we have a thing called Etsy. I'm sure you've heard of Etsy, which is a marketplace for one-of-a-kind, you know, production, because there's also that here in the Western world. But one of the things that came, and Surya, you talked about 3D printing, there was a schism in Etsy because people started to do limited run production on Etsy. They weren't doing one of a kind, they were doing 10 of a kind or 20 of a kind. And it caused a civil war at Etsy, where the people who are doing one of a kind said these people are cheating because they're creating multiples of something and it makes it look like it's only one, where I'm creating one and the price pressures that are being put on me, I'm actually having to sell them for less because the person that's making 10 of them is able to make them more efficiently than my one. This literally almost imploded the company, and they literally had to mediate that discussion in order to make sure that the people who want to create one-of-a-kind items could still do it and make a living, and then the people who create multiples actually had some guardrails so they didn't become IKEA in Etsy, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So these are huge issues, but Neelam gave me hope because she had a very disciplined approach in terms of her framework and her systems in order to make small scale production, you know, you could actually make it work. I think it's a fantastic story.
I just wanted to add,
Yeah.
if I may, you know, just a question that sort of, I'm sure is burning everywhere else, and it's kind of puts everything in context here. So we right now are in a space where we're looking at privilege and access to technology. I mean, we're talking about augmented reality, extended reality, etc., and so on. So, right. So that's happening on the one hand, and that is kind of creating a space for all kinds of possibilities for privileged people. What happens to design in the rooted landscape of India, or any other country which is not in the urban space, which is not in the developed space, in inverted commas? What do you think?
You know, it's obviously a key question. Obviously, the digital divide is real. We live on a digitally powered planet, right? And there are different levels of access, particularly when we talk about digital technologies, there's limited levels of access in various places. I think one important thing for me is to really think about sort of not overdo the connection between what is sort of these, as you call it, rooted landscapes of, you know, that they're somehow tied to atoms, and that the new world is tied to bits, because the bits have really the potential and the power to upend old hierarchies. Think about this. To build manufacturing, to build marketing channel, to be able to get research and all of that was this mega huge enterprise that required huge amounts of money. Only a privileged few had access to build factories, buy materials, keep inventory, buy advertising, ship stuff and all that. Today, in the world of bits and the world of digital, a credit card with a few thousand rupees already gives you channel, gives you factory, gives you inventory, gives you research. And this scales from a few thousand rupees of buying, whether it's Amazon Web Services or something else, that once you get something, you can scale to the next level. So we should not conflate sort of tradition and keep the bits out of it, because we found there's incredible power of bits to upend old hierarchies and also empower folks, right? Now, how we do it hasn't been solved yet, but that is really a mission. For me, the thing that I bet on is two things. The supercomputer we're all starting to carry in our pockets, being our primary computational device, and the cloud, right? Yeah. Both the price of which come down. There's no reason 7.5 billion people can't have access to this.
But sorry, to build on Ananda, I have one answer. I have one word: Africa. Africa. Africa has shown that 1 billion people who live in all 55 countries in Africa, they are on the leading edge of the use of mobile technology. Not the United States, not China, not anywhere else. Africa is showing the way of innovation using mobile technology. And they're not just using like the most cutting edge technology, they're using tried and true, just good enough technologies like old Nokia phones that had the touch tones, you know, they still have the physical touch tones. For example, M-Pesa is a money platform that's used in East Africa. It is the largest money platform in the world. It is, in terms of the amount of people that use it. And these are poor people that only earn so many shillings a day. And their mobile phone is their payment system. Their mobile phone is their communication system. Their mobile phone is their gateway to creating community, tracking prices of commodities, so the middlemen don't cheat them, you know, in terms of the price of their crops. They're learning to communicate with each other. They're also, Surya, you talked about that one child in Kenya who, with the cattle, you know, just sort of created this solution. That's exactly what's happening in Africa. So I think Africa, to me, which has many issues around decolonization and colonialization, is really showing how the bottom 80% of society can actually be empowered by what Surya was just talking about.
Thank you so much.
I want to echo that, you know, it's interesting, right? When we think about design, innovation, oftentimes Africa doesn't come into the conversation very much, but there is a lot that is happening, starting to happen there. Very interestingly, we just started running design swarms workshops using WhatsApp on a very cheap phone in Sierra Leone to look at gender violence, right?
Love it.
But this problem that is unsolvable from a distance by skilled, amazing designers who don't have lived experience of what's taking place. Suddenly, the frameworks become very portable. Again, thanks to the, you know, what Adam's referencing, this notion, again, digitally powered, globally interconnected planet where we things can move around and we can start to collaborate. There are real opportunities here, which also connect back with your question, Anando, right?
Right, and one last thing is one of the big flat tires in what we're talking about is the network. Without the network, this won't work. Not talking about human networks. I'm talking about an actual physical bit network. And so Facebook and also Elon Musk is creating a global internet system that will be able to beam internet all over the world equally. So we will have a much more improved network, which will then unleash new innovations and new type of services because you have the bandwidth to actually do it. What's sort of holding us up is the incomplete network around the world. I think once we can solve the network issue, I think then you're going to really see massive change.
Just as a follow-up question, sorry, Amit, but so you guys are also faculty, you're teachers, you share a lot with students and young people. So there are two words here, right? There is one education and there is one learning. Now, we obviously know that the learning is changing, and so we have talked about it, Adam. You've talked about it at length. So what is therefore the future of this word education? Because do you see it live a longer life, or do you see learning beginning to become another kind of system, which is driven in some other kind of way? What next?
So I have an opinion on that. I actually think there are three words. I think the third word is training, right? And training is about skills. You learn to use Photoshop better. You learn to use whatever's current skill, right? Makes you marketable in the world. There's education that typically takes place in university-ish situations, which provides you the foundational stuff to be a whole human being, right? And have that full way of looking at the world and prepares you for the world, right? There's a lot of folks who just do training, never end up doing education because it's vocational training, right? The third one is learning. That's the lifelong activity that we do forever, right? We're never going to stop doing that, right? So that's how I see it. One's more skill, one is that foundational knowledge, and one is just part of living.
I'll answer it slightly differently, and I know.
Okay, awesome. Okay.
You know, we are stuck in an educational model that is hundreds of years old, which is you have the sage on the stage, and the sage on the stage then professes to the students like a bandwidth, broadband, just professes. And then they supposedly soak up all that information and then go do homework and then bring it back in and it's graded and all that sort of stuff. The way I teach and the way Surya thinks and probably teaches is the classroom has to be turned upside down. It's called upside down teaching. So instead of the classroom or contact time being the sage on the stage and lecturing to students for that time, and then they do everything outside of class, all of that stuff is consumed out of class, and the class becomes a laboratory for hands-on learning. It's where you refine your thinking and the skills, the competency, and the confidence that comes from the competency in order to do better things in shorter periods of time. I also think the other thing that's going to change, Anando, is I'm sure it's happening in India, because India, there's been an explosion of design schools. When I was in India, there were 3 design programs. There was NID, there was IIT Powai, and there was JJ School of Arts, which was the Victorian school. That was the oldest one in India. Now, every day I get up, I'm learning about new design programs in India. Was that design programs are moving to what they call a certificate-based model. Is you get certified in specific skill sets that have a certificate that is objective, that lets people know that you know how to do this. There is no training required. The problem, and I think Surya hit it, is that is vocational training. We need vocational training, but we have to take the certification model and then create a horizontal connection throughout them all that is about knowledge creation, and it's about value creation. Because you can have all the certificates in the world and you're still stuck at a microeconomic scale. You've got to be able to connect the macroeconomic and the microeconomic together, and that happens through knowledge. Without knowledge, skills to me are meaningless, in my opinion. They have limited impact. So education has to make that transition, and it still has not made it. It's incredible how many design programs I go to that are still stuck in the studio model of 1900. I could literally change their clothes and I would think that I'm in 1900 rather than in 2020.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. I think we can continue this conversation for as long as we can. But with the time in hand, I'll have to call it close of the session, right? But we'll surely kind of, all the questions that participants have asked, I'll send it over to both of you. If you could, take some time to answer that, we'll send those notes to the participants over an email, right? So thank you, Professor VUCA and Professor Kailash, for joining us today.
Amit, before you close, we have a sketch note of the session that the students have created. That's the highlight.
Oh, good job. Yeah.
Let me bring that up for you.
Yes. Absolutely.
This one is for Adam's session, and if you want to just summarize it.
Nice. I think it was great to understand the play of balance that you were talking about and the hybrid and the share economy. I think it was a great learning experience for me, and I'm sure the students gained a lot from it. I'm looking forward for engaging with you more, and of course building something for the students here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for doing that, by the way. Wonderful.
Thanks.
And the next one that we have is for Surya's session.
Oh, absolutely brilliant! Absolutely brilliant. That design.
That's so cool.
Yeah, we'll send it over to you. My students can't wait to swim in that process with you sometime soon. So thank you so much for this great presentation. It was brilliant to have you all join us for this session today. But ladies and gentlemen, don't go anywhere. We have Dawn waiting on the other side. Thank you so much, Professor Vanka, Professor Adam. It was great to have you. Thank you.